Welcome back. This last week saw hundreds of America's top-ranking military officers summoned to Washington to hear directly from the Secretary of Defense and President Donald Trump. Many were wondering what this was all about and why it was such a unique moment, with a very quiet and attentive audience of generals and admirals hearing directly from the Commander-in-Chief. Joining us now to help sort things out is a familiar face with many years of service to this country. Retired Brigadier General Don Bolduc joins us on Close-Up. General, thanks for connecting with us.
Thank you. It's my pleasure, Adam. It's good to see you, and my best to all your viewers.
Likewise. So take us through, when you were leading the military group you were in Africa, you would have been called to this meeting. What would you have been thinking when that order came down?
Well, I certainly would have been asking my staff questions on what's the purpose of the meeting, if there's any indication on subject matter, what we're going to talk about. I would certainly be thinking that we're going to talk about high-level policy, strategy, and operational art, which is the job of general officers and admirals. This is what we think about the most.
And General, a lot of people were asking, gosh, is it safe to bring all of these military leaders to one place at one time? What were your thoughts on that, of the wisdom of doing something so unprecedented like this?
Well, I wasn't really concerned about the safety, given given the fact that, we have the ability to be able to fly high-level people all over the world. But I would be worried about, or would be concerned with how this would be a functional gathering and what kind of discussion at the policy, strategic, operational level would lend itself to be able to solve some of the problems, or a back and forth dialogue. That's what senior leaders do. Senior leaders talk back and forth, and they share ideas. And sometimes those ideas are contrary to the subject matter, because it's good to have contrarians. It's good to have, hard questions asked. But in this forum, that would have been impossible. And the scope of it, each general is going to travel with a minimum of one person, maybe two, most three. I saw there was some senior enlisted advisors there, sergeants, majors, and others representing and with their 4, 3, and 2 and 1-star bosses. So it was the possibility of this being much larger and a focused meeting. Meetings are so important, and the first thing you learned in your master's business course is, hey, if you're going to have a meeting, make sure it has purpose, direction, motivation, a focus, and it's appropriate. And I just don't think that could be accomplished in this forum. And, looking at the results of the meeting, what was discussed, I think it was validated that it really wasn't a focus at the right level for these senior leaders.
Yeah, General, what did you think of the content of what the Secretary of Defense in particular had to say? A lot of people are fixating on this. I'm embarrassed to see, fat generals and admirals walking around the Pentagon.
Yeah, I know that's, that is obviously concerning. We have height and weight standards from the highest ranking to the lowest ranking. But that's internal military department and below business. Certainly, most of what he talked about is what we empower our non-commissioned officers, the backbone of our military, to do. The standards lie with them, and they have an officer at the platoon level all the way up to the combatant command 4-star level that oversees that. Really, the Secretary of Defense did not focus on the appropriate level for the audience. He focused on tactical level and below lower level organizational level issues that, quite frankly, are, non-commissioned officer business. And if there is a problem in the ranks that he observes or has an impression or a perception, then that's best left to a personal phone call or mention it directly to the senior leader that you're meeting with, and let it flow that way, not something that should be, televised, in the manner in which it was televised, because it becomes pejorative, it becomes insulting, it can be a bit confusing, and it certainly is level. Now, the Secretary of Defense didn't have much experience above the tactical level. So we all resort to our comfort level, and that's where he's most comfortable. The men and women that he's talking to in this audience, very well educated and very well experienced in the policy level, in the strategy level, in the operational art level. And of course they're concerned about, the morale, health, and welfare and the standards in the military, but they handle that through their subordinate commanders and, most importantly, our very professional non-commissioned officer corps.
And General, a lot of people were thinking, oh gosh, this is such an interesting setup with, these very stone-faced admirals and generals. It's not a normal crowd that the president sees or that the Secretary of Defense might speak to at kind of a more of a rally-like setting. Explain, the idea of swearing an oath to the Constitution versus any elected leader.
Right. So nothing is more important than the oath that we take to our Constitution. I often say I've taken 2 oaths in my life, one to my Constitution and one to my wife, and I haven't violated either one of them. That's what they mean to us. And we raise our hand and we affirm that every time we get promoted, every time a service member re-enlists, we're raising our right hand to support and defend the Constitution of the United States through all enemies, foreign and domestic. And that allegiance is to our country. It's to the people of America. It's not to a leader or a group of leaders or a political faction. And so the men and women in that audience are to remain apolitical. When I ran for office, I took heat from, the Republican side of the party because I didn't vote when I was a general officer. I voted all the way up through the ranks to colonel, but once I became a general officer, I knew that my appointments were going to be bipartisan appointments to an administration that would either be Democrat or Republican, and I had to be able to stand in front of them and tell them, that I would be serving the nation, that I would be remaining loyal to the Constitution, and everything that I did, all orders that I followed, would be consistent with the values and principles and mandates under law and to the oath that I took. And nothing is more important to the men and women in that room than the fact that we swear an oath to something bigger than ourselves and not to any one individual, political party, or political faction.
And General, as we wrap up here, I'd like to get your thoughts on one more topic. The idea of domestic military deployments. Obviously, this is something that's happened in the past in the United States in definitely more urgent situations, post-riot, during riot, those kind of things. What are your thoughts on those deployments for a more law enforcement purpose?
I absolutely do not support them, and I would not be able to, as a general officer given an order, to send my service members into the local areas without it meeting the lawful requirements of rebellion, insurrection. I would have to resign. I would have to say, no, this goes beyond the scope. This is wrong. We are not there to police Americans for law enforcement reasons. We have local, state, and other federal agencies that are responsible for that. It's a very slippery slope, and it's dangerous to employ our militaries. I think back to when I was running for office, and if I had said that I supported that while I ran for office, I would have been thrown off the stage. That is not something that we do unless we're dealing with an insurrection or a rebellion or something extremely serious that has to be enforced, that is limited in nature and in scope, like how John F. Kennedy used them. I always use that as an example when I'm talking to folks, or when I'm talking to other military personnel, or when I was in the military. We study these things. We learn these things. We are dedicated to this. And what we don't want to do, and we worked hard. I came in to the military, spent 36 years post-Vietnam, and we were rebuilding our military with our Vietnam veterans who were not treated well by our government. And they stood strong, and they made sure that the next generation of combat veterans would never be treated the same way they were treated. And we stood shoulder to shoulder with them. And we built back the reputation of our military. And this is a quick way to undo all of that. Our military is a symbol of our power. Yes, we can do things domestically if it's legal. But in this case, the way they're being used by this administration in my opinion, and I would resign if I was on active duty and was told to do what we're doing with the military in Washington, D.C., and Portland, and in other areas. It is the job of somebody else. It is not the appropriate use. The military does not need to focus on the enemy within for political reasons.
All right, General Bolduc, thanks for joining us on Close-Up. We didn't get to say this enough during the campaign time, but thank you so much for your service to the United States, too.
You're very welcome, Adam. Thank you. Thank you for all WMUR does to deliver messages to the state of New Hampshire and beyond. God bless you all, and have a great day, and my best to your viewers.
All right, thanks again. We appreciate it.